And I've decided that it's no longer my job to make people understand my life. My job is in turn to protect my life. And so I just sometimes literally take a deep breath and I exhale that shit. And I'm like, you know what? And I walk away from my phone because that internal work is where it all begins. I have to look inward and think to myself, is this upsetting me? It's obvious that it is if I feel that strongly about it, but it's more of, why is this upsetting me? And second to that, what is there to do about it, if at all anything?
I'm Casey Main, author, writer, and party girl turned spiritual junkie, and I'm dedicated to helping you better understand the most important and most complicated relationship you'll ever be in, the one you have with yourself. It's the only relationship that you're in for the entirety of your time here, and it affects every single aspect of your life. Yet it is the one most often overlooked. This podcast is here to help you explore that relationship, get to know yourself so you can accept yourself, heal yourself, and become a better version of yourself. So let's get to it. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Better You podcast. I am your host, Casey Main, and as always, I'm going to start off by thanking you very much for being here. I very much appreciate it, so I want to make a point to say that in every episode so that you guys know that every week I very much appreciate you tuning into the show. I am super excited about this conversation. I absolutely loved this guest, and this conversation just felt good in my soul. And I really think you guys are going to appreciate it as well, because if you're listening to this podcast, that means you have some interest in bettering yourself, personal development, self-work, self-love, whatever you want to call it. And when you're into that kind of work, you tend to be like a magnet to people who then come to you for help and support. And while that's great, because usually if you want to better yourself, you're also into being of service to others and helping them, it can be super exhausting. So this episode really talks a lot about how to protect your own energy in terms of setting boundaries and really understanding yourself and paying attention to how you're feeling so that it's not so exhausting to be in the space of helping and supporting others. And this is actually the perfect follow-up to last week's episode where we talked a lot about the power of calm. So in this episode, we talk about, getting quiet and still and slowing down so that we can be more aware of our feelings and are able to protect our energy because we better understand how our energy works and what essentially sucks the life out of us. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode yet, I recommend that you do. It is titled Breathing Through Stress and Anxiety with Dr. Emma Seppala. And then a couple other prior episodes that are related to the content we talk about today. So we talk about friendships and how there are certain people in your life that maybe only show up when they need something versus showing up when you need something. And so if you're interested in a deeper dive into friendship, then check out episode 57, The Science of Friendship and Building Your Tribe with Lydia Denworth. And then we also talk a lot about family and how how the mental health issues within our family members that maybe we weren't even aware of, but how that can impact you growing up. And today's guest, very similar to me, has a very kind of close family where we're all up in each other's business and just lots of talking and energy and whatnot. So if you relate to that, then you'll probably be interested in episode 40, Finding and Allowing Individuality Within Family with Dr. Karen Anderson Abril. And then we also talk about anger, which is something I know I've struggled with, or I don't struggle with it. I'm more aware that I'm not in tune with my own anger. And I think that is a common thing, especially for women, because we're taught more to deal with anger in terms of being sad versus actually being mad. So if you resonate with that, then check out episode 35, Understanding Anger by Gender with Soraya Shamali. And then because we talk about setting boundaries, you can go way back into the archives, episode 15, Meeting Needs and Relationships with Dr. Christy Overstreet. That's probably the first episode where we really start to talk about boundaries. It's a really good one. I absolutely love Dr. Christy. And then as far as what's coming up on the show, so next week we will hear from Lise Wilcox about her new book, To Call Myself Beloved. And this is a fun conversation. So her and I have kind of parallel stories and similar personalities in that the conversation swings from like super spiritual and philosophical talk at one point and then to like really down to earth confessions involving like binge watching Netflix. So that's a fun one. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that. And then the week after that, I'm so excited. So we are going to have Brandy Harvey on the show. So yes, last name Harvey, as in she's one of Steve Harvey's daughters. And she's also the founder of Beyond Her, host of the Beyond Her podcast, and author of the book Breakthrough Sold Separately: Get Out of the Boat of Mediocrity and Walk on Water. I could not be more excited to talk to her, and nervous. Like I get nervous to talk to people I'm like super excited to chat with. And that was actually even the case for today's guest, because I don't know, I could just tell from like going through her website and like her work that she's just a badass. And so I was a little bit nervous to chat with her, but we connected immediately. I absolutely love her. And so let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about her. Asha Tarry is an author, certified life coach, and award-winning mental health advocate. She is also the founder of Behavioral Health Consulting Services, which provides consulting, counseling, and coaching to creatives and small business owners in the wellness and entertainment industries and educational sector. As a mindfulness practitioner, she's coached and consulted individuals and groups of people throughout the US, Asia, Africa, and Europe on personal development, lifestyle, and wellness. She's consulted with initiatives on maternal health, global workplace retention, and has been a writer and speaker for several outlets focused on mental health. Her work spans 2 decades and includes working with families, couples, professional adults, millennials, and people with anxiety and work-life imbalance. Her new book, Adulting as a Millennial: A Guide to Everything Your Parents Didn't Teach You, was mostly written for millennials who deal with anxiety, imposter syndrome, and relationship challenges. The purpose of the book is to help Gen Y create more joy in their lives, while also surrendering the beliefs that trap them from living in the now. And in this episode, we discuss how the mental health issues present in our family that we grow up with, whether we are aware of them or not, can impact our adult lives and relationships. How addressing and healing our own trauma results in lifestyle changes that aren't always easily accepted by other people in our lives. The healing power of not taking things personally and letting things go. How critical thinking and the willingness to see things from different perspectives can reduce stress and suffering. How to have conviction for what's right without the suffering of being angry about it. Why people may be prone to hanging on to anger and negativity. How to set boundaries and protect your own energy with people who are constantly looking to you for help and support. How to decipher between when it's time to set a boundary with someone else versus when you have your own work to do to stop projecting onto them. The importance of the action involved with boundaries versus simply setting them. And finally, why she wrote a book specific to helping millennials. This is such a wonderful conversation. I'm so excited to share it with you all. As always, if you enjoy it, I ask that you please rate and review the show. That helps a lot with growing the podcast and discoverability and helps me get more incredible guests like today's on the show. So that is it. We're going to go ahead and jump into this conversation with Asha. All right, well, let's just start a little bit with learning about you and the work that you do, and maybe a little bit of backstory of kind of how you came into this work.
Okay, just go right now?
Yep, just jump on into it.
Well, first, Casey, let me just say I'm glad that we're doing this. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It is a pleasure to be with you. So looking forward to our conversation. But a little bit about who I am is, I think the short is I was born into a family that had probably a significant amount of undiagnosed mental health issues, and they still do. And, I had a lot of challenges earlier in life with my health, and just changes in family dynamics. And so I knew as young as 4 years old that I wanted to become a professional helper, but I
Mm.
always thought I would be a nurse. And so I actually was going to college to become a nurse and had talked about it my entire life. But then after a couple of years of my nursing program, which I attended at Pace University in Pleasantville, New York, I really found out that it wasn't quite the thing for me, for a lot of reasons. I did want to still use my background and training in science, but I wasn't quite sure until one of my friends introduced me to human services. And I took a few courses, fell in love with it, went right into my master's program after graduation, and got a master's in social work from Fordham University in Manhattan, in New York City, and just found that that was probably the best decision I ever made, because from then on, my career took off. I met a lot of great people, and I've been able to still use science and, in some ways, the medical profession to leverage my relationships and to really grow my value in the marketplace. And so now I have a wonderful, thriving private practice. Even before COVID, I was able to do a lot of work online and see people through video. And also, as a coach, I've been able to see a lot of people and work with people internationally. And that's been growing. Actually, during COVID, it's been growing quite a
Hmm.
lot. And so here I am as a psychotherapist, a certified life coach, and now an author. And it's been quite a ride. This is my 20th year in the field, and I see things changing all the time. I'm learning constantly from clients what they need. And it's been a really interesting ride these last 20 years.
That's awesome. So what I love about your story is you knew early on you wanted to be some form of a helper, and you thought that was going to take the form of a nurse, and then kind of life shifted you and you went in a different direction, but still under the same like umbrella category of helping people. And it's funny, I when I was younger, I had that same awareness, but just I don't know, I got off track along the way. Like I remember when I was really young, I wanted to be a doctor for the basic reason of wanting to help people. And I think when you're super young, that's kind of the only occupation you know of, maybe that helps people.
Hmm.
And then I switched it to wanting to be a child psychologist, and then went to college and, kind of was told I might not want to immediately go to more school right out of graduating. So pick up a second major. And then that just sent me down a different path. And it's only, I think, since I left my corporate job and ventured out on this path of freelance writing and podcasting that I'm kind of back in that helper space. So like I almost like abandoned it for close to 20 years and have found my way back to it. And I sometimes think, oh, I wonder if I had known this was the route and stayed with it, like where would my career be? So I think it's really impressive that you knew at a young age and you stuck with it. I think that's a lot of us give up our childhood dreams for one reason or another.
Oh, well, I think that's an interesting connection between us. Actually, I always thought of it as abandonment too, because I talked about becoming a nurse. I used to practice my nursing skills. I thought I was doing that, at least when I was a kid, on my father. And when I was accepted into Pace University's nursing program, I was struggling. I didn't love the program. I was studying a ton. I actually wrote about this in my book too, because I wanted people to see what changing your career can do to you, especially when you're not thriving as I had been previously in school. And I was really unhappy. And I thought that I was abandoning this thing that I chose my entire life, or I thought maybe chose me. But to my surprise, my parents weren't disappointed, and they were very, very liberal, actually, to my surprise, in their thinking about it. They just left it up in my hands and asked me what did I want to do. And there were a couple of other ideas I had in between, but at that time I was already going into my junior year. I didn't want to change schools, or I didn't want to go that far off into something else because there wasn't a lot that I was very interested in school. I mean, I really enjoyed, I think, my core classes, but the science and the medicine, it was starting to stress me out. So I
Mm-hmm.
used to feel a little guilty, because for 14 years, from 4 to 18 or 4 to 20, actually, I thought this is what I'm going to do. So when I went over to human services, I wasn't really that clear about what that program was about.
Mm-hmm.
But once I took a couple of classes and I really found my footing, then I felt more secure and it wasn't too, like you said, far off from where I began. But I did think
Mm-hmm.
that I had abandoned it. I had abandoned the idea of helping because I really wasn't that sure what I would be able to do until I got into the field of social work.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point that I think happens to a lot of us is we set some kind of a goal or a plan
Hmm.
for our lives, and then this theme has come up in a couple different podcast episode conversations, that it's like we hold on so tightly to it and we're
Hmm.
not paying attention to, okay, is this really right for me? But then if you even start to question that, deciding to abandon something that you thought you really wanted, but are recognizing is not working for you, to go out into the unknown and not really sure what you're going to do. Like I think that's something a lot of us are faced with, but we tend to choose and are usually encouraged by the people in our lives to stay put in that safer route. So, I mean, I also I applaud your parents for being okay with that. I think mine probably would have fought me a little bit more.
Yeah, I thought that's what mine were going to do. I don't know. Maybe they were tired.
Yeah. Yeah, at that point they're just like, "Oh my god, we concede."
So I was glad. I was grateful.
Okay. Can I ask, and if you don't want to answer this, that's okay, but what type of mental health issues were present in your family? Like, was it kind of depression that we see so common, or
Hmm.
was it maybe more like extreme issues? And like, how were you? I guess, like, yeah, what was present in your family?
I'm glad that you asked that. No one ever asked me that question. I think coming from a family of people who have so much pride and want to keep things on the surface seemingly okay, I didn't know, growing up, what mental illness was, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really understand it even in college, when I was probably going through depression in my first couple of years of school, of undergraduate. So as I got into the field of mental health and I started to, as we often do when we become mental health professionals, we start analyzing our family, especially if you go
Mm-hmm.
into your own analysis like I did. Then I started to see dysfunction that I knew was dysfunction when I was a young adult living in it, and even as a teenager, but I didn't quite know. So now, as a professional, if I were to look at my family, I would say a lot of mental health issues that stem from probably the trauma of being Black. We have a lot of mixed race people in my family. I think there's a lot of that. Um, Also, there's extreme amount of anxiety, and it's very visible, from
Mm-hmm.
just the pace at which we talk. I mean, some of my family, like I am, are from New York, but others are from like further south. And so just the pace at which we talk, not only as New Yorkers, but just sometimes when we're speaking to each other, is really rapid. Even how we change our thoughts in the middle of a sentence. I could just see those symptoms of anxiety when I'm actually tuned in to my family.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, and this one that I think is a biggie, which a lot of people don't want to talk about. There's a lot of personality pathology in my family, so I definitely see, with some of the men, which isn't very common, borderline personalities. And it's quite striking because you at a distance don't know what you're looking at when you see a lot of the issues around attachment, or
Mm-hmm.
the like erratic ways that they handle stress. Um, but I do see that a lot with the men in my family, and I see it with some of the women. If people aren't familiar with borderline personality disorder, what that looks like is a striking difference between people idealizing you one moment and then devaluing you in the next. People being easily injured or wounded when you disagree with them and will sometimes cut you off as a result of being injured by you. People who get
Mm,
extremely angry quickly and personalize it, and then in some ways turn on you, and victimize themselves and sort of demonize you, especially when you think outside of the box or you have different ways of living your life. There's a lot of judgment in my family around not doing whatever is considered heteronormative or cultural. So
mm-hmm,
there's a lot of stigma around um, homosexuality, and there's a lot of homosexuality in my family too that they don't deal with. So,
mm-hmm.
not that that's a mental illness, but just the way that my family ignores it or even
Right.
demonizes people who are homosexual. And we have a significant amount of people in my family who are. So when I see that, it's really taught me a lot about how to protect myself, and it's also opened my eyes to the kinds of people that I attract, because there's lastly a lot of narcissism, which is another characteristic of people who also have borderline personality.
Oh man. Okay. So much of this is, I've got like goosebumps because it's just connecting. Like I grew up with zero awareness of the concept of anxiety or, any kind of attachment issues, all of that. And
Mhm.
as I've gotten more into this work and really just kind of wanting to understand myself better, but luckily, like I get to talk to all these experts like you. And so then I always learn a lot. And so I didn't even think about, I mean, my family, and look, I just did it. I switch thoughts like mid sentence all the time.
Mhm.
And my family does that, mostly the women in my family. And we talk very fast.
Mhm.
And we always joke that if you want to get a word in edgewise, like you're going to have to interrupt. So I'll find myself
Mhm.
with a tendency to interrupt people, which I don't love, but that's just the world I grew up in. And I didn't know that was a symptom of anxiety. But if I
Yeah.
think about it, it absolutely makes sense.
The blurting out when you're in groups of people because you're trying to keep up, the interrupting people, the switching thoughts mid sentence, the rapidity in your speech. Yeah, those are very common in my family too. And it's hard and exhausting to keep up with it. As I've slowed myself down through mindfulness, I sometimes can't spend a lot of time around people who are like that because it really wears me down.
Yes, I've noticed that too, and I have not done a great job slowing myself down. I'm trying to, but it does get very exhausting, which this is then a
Mhm.
perfect segue into kind of our main theme of this conversation of how it can be exhausting to be in any type of a healing profession. But I think also if you start down this journey at all of self-awareness, personal development, self-love, whatever you want to call it, you start to put in the work of better understanding yourself so that you can be more mindful and more self-aware and intentional versus reactionary and all of that, which is just turning it inward versus if you're a professional like healer like you are, then you're helping other people sort through that. You
Mhm.
can't help but notice it in others, which then I find myself in this weird space of I'm not a therapist and certainly not
Mhm.
their therapist. So where's the line between how much I try and point out to them? I don't want to say what they're doing wrong, but what's
Mhm.
going on, versus just kind of knowing my role and sitting back, which then I also find exhausting.
Yeah, I think that nowadays, because of people Googling everything, we all in some ways are our own healers. I always believe that, but we're also advocates because of, the amount of information that you can find on the internet. So I don't discount or discredit people who can see visibly the symptoms of and signs of anxiety, because you need to be able to understand how it impacts the people that you're around, should you care about those people, but also how it impacts you and what you may need to do to protect your energy, because
Mm-hmm.
energy does get expended from spending time with people who maybe talk a lot or have a lot of thoughts, maybe take a lot of energy when you're with them. So you have to know how to protect that, and it's good to notice it.
So when you first started to get into this work, did you notice like, did you have repercussions from growing up in the family that you did that you then had to sort through yourself before getting to a point where you could help others? Like, did you have a lot of, I guess, mess you had to sort through?
Mhm. What's very interesting is that trauma, which I've had my entire life, and I believe a lot of people of color are born into that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Trauma for me had a very interesting way of showing up in my life to where I could identify it. I don't actually think, if I had to really take time to think about it, that I even knew I was traumatized until several years ago, which is kind of
Mm,
striking because I've been doing this work for 20 years. I used to be in psychoanalysis 3 times a week for 3 years. I've also been in individual therapy once a week. And we unfortunately, and I don't know if it was because my therapist was white, but we didn't talk about trauma. We
mm,
talked about depression. We talked about mood disorders. Um, because it definitely you see some low grade depression in my family and in my circles of friends, and most people I think at times have a low grade depression, but we didn't talk about the trauma. And so, as a person who started to become more trauma informed as a provider and started to really study it and see it in my clients, and now I have probably 100% of my work actually is probably trauma informed at this point. I didn't notice it. I really started to notice it interestingly enough, when I became a mindfulness practitioner, which was
mm-hmm.
about 3.5 to 4 years ago, it was through that work of getting still and slowing down and becoming more conscious of myself that even through my analysis, I didn't associate with. So now, as someone who's going back in time, sort of as like a running story in my mind, when I sit back and I reflect on people I've dated, friendships I've had, um, even to this very day that I can make the associations between why certain characteristics in my friends trigger my anxiety or trigger sometimes even my rage. And it
Mm,
ties right back into my relationships I have with people in my family. And then that is where I notice, oh, okay, there's the trauma. And so that's why this thing still bothers me, or that's why this disrupts my life in a certain way, or it has. So it's really more as I become a practitioner of meditation that I associate to those kinds of things that we call like our stuff. But
mm-hmm.
before that, I saw it as, I came through a decent family. They had their crap with them like every other family does. I knew early, very early, like probably before 18, that I couldn't live around them past graduating from high school. And so I separated myself and developed my own life. And that's where I would say, if there were repercussions, that's where the repercussions came from because I was always like an independent thinker. And because I didn't do or uh, withstand certain things that my family had allowed and introduced and conditioned us to withstand for so long, that's when people would start to say things about me, or that's when my
Mm.
family would start to get really upset with how I was changing and pointing out the problems.
Yes. See, I think, especially with family, because like you said earlier, I don't know if it's pride or what it is, but it's like as a family unit, people don't want to address the issues. And so you grow up thinking it's normal for the most part. I think if so like I'm similar, that I would say, oh, I had a great family, I had a great childhood. So then my brain doesn't want to allow me to go down. However, here's where the issues, and this is where it maybe affected me and impacted me growing up. It's like we don't want to say, yes, they were loving and they did their best, yet also there were problems. Like I think that's
Mhm.
it's a hard dueling truths to accept.
It really is. But the great thing about all of these theories that we learn in school and we study to become a better mental health professional, it really teaches one that duality can
Mhm.
exist. And
Mhm.
it's really comforting to know that, because you do grow up a lot of times, at least I felt I did, where that was not tolerated. You couldn't be one and another thing.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't think
Our
one thought and
society
another
doesn't
thought.
allow that. Yeah.
Exactly. It's
We're
like,
very either or.
yeah, we're very, very binary, and we want people to be binary along with us. And I have never been that way. I can remember all the way back into early childhood when my dad and I would have conversations. I give you a great example. My father, who is like, was the love of my life, he passed away in 2019. And
Oh.
when we used to spend time together, sometimes we would disagree about something, or he would have a very strong opinion about something, even when I was a teenager, and I didn't like maybe something that he said. But literally within 10 minutes, we would go from being frustrated or me being annoyed with him and not wanting to talk to laughing and joking about something else, unrelated.
Mm-hmm.
And we would move right on past it. And that for me was the thing that saved me, because my mother and I had a very different relationship, and she would hold a grudge like no one's business. So the
Mm-hmm.
idea that I could have a person like my father who could let things go and he could heal quicker and recover quicker from injury than she could helped me to be a healthier person than if I had two parents that couldn't do that. So it really was important that I saw that, because when I saw myself as being able to see things from multiple perspectives. And I think that's really helped me as an individual, and meeting all kinds of people from everywhere in the world. And it's also helped me to not take everything so personally, because I can see a lot of things
Yes.
from different points of view.
Yes, I think, oh, I love that, because it's such a big moment to realize, okay, I'm taking this personally. And for whatever reason, we feel like we have to hold on to these things that happened, and these little hurts that we encounter along the way. And I don't know why we feel like we do, but when you hit that realization of, okay, I can forgive and move on and be happy, like I'm just causing my own internal suffering.
Hmm.
That's been a very big wake up factor for me. I still struggle with it, but I'll catch myself sometimes when I'm doing it to be like, okay, this doesn't have to be a big thing. And I'm not sure where I learned that behavior. I'm sure it was present in my family, but I think it's probably present in the media we consume, and just kind of expectations of how life goes.
Yeah. And you know what? And it's not, I don't know if it's not easy for people to try that. I would assume it isn't, based on the strong reactions I see people have in the media about, I always throw this out, like a Kanye West, for example, especially as a person who uses social media to elevate conversations. The way people react to me when I post something about Kanye and compassion for him, is really, really like strong, and people have loud opinions about it. And it just brings it back to that dichotomous way of thinking, where people cannot hold space a lot of times for two opposing thoughts. But I think
Yes.
we just don't get that kind of training to do that early enough, which is why I was really fortunate when I got older and I look back, into my life, that I guess this was part of my education. I don't know, but I just really felt that I had the opportunity to think critically early enough in my life, so that when I became an adult, it didn't seem foreign to have critical thinking skills. But the numbers of people I run into that can't think critically amazes me. So I used
Yes.
to think, and I was naive, like, oh, why can't we think this and this? Or how about we try to think about something differently with this particular issue? And I just find that people, sometimes do struggle. Sometimes maybe, they don't, and they're just putting up an affront. But I have found that my life is less stressed, because that comes to me innately. And I see how stressed out people get who cannot do that, because they have this fixed idea about something that they're convicted in, and they don't allow themselves to be challenged, or to challenge the way that they think about something as it pertains to how they suffer from it. Like, it's not the same as being
Yes.
convicted, like, this thing is important, this matters, this is why we have to fight this issue. But it's like you're convicted and you're pained by your conviction, and you can't seem to get yourself out of that place that you're stuck in because you believe this is the only way to be or the only way to think about this issue.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. You are the first person to be able to articulate that in a way that I've been thinking about and struggling to articulate.
Hmm.
So I just had like several aha moments. I love this. I literally have like my arms in the air, like I'm like cheering. So it's a combination of several things we've already talked about. One, we are like attached to a single idea of something, and then we take it so personally.
Mhm.
And when I try and have conversations with people about maybe they don't have to be so angry and stressed and agitated about it. A lot of times the argument you get back is, well, you have to stand for something. And yes, that is how change happens in our lives, in society, and all of it. But that is such a great point and beautifully said about, yes, you can have conviction for something, but that doesn't mean it has to cause you internal suffering,
That's
which I
right.
think is like a big point that people aren't maybe seeing, that anger a lot of times is internal. It doesn't mean it doesn't have a place, but it's internal suffering.
Mhm.
But people feel like, I don't know, they're justified to be angry, or they should be angry, or being angry means something.
Mhm.
But ultimately, like, it's also making you miserable.
It is in a lot of ways. And I think you did a great job of unpacking that too, because I wonder if the way people feel about something makes them feel alive, which in my work, I notice that it
Mm.
does. People feel more alive when they can feel something powerful, and sometimes it's to their own detriment. But I also think in this climate that we're living in, if you're not feeling very strongly about an issue, people think you don't care.
Hmm.
They think that you're not informed, you're inhuman. So I just see it as a lot of mind manipulation in some ways, and also as an extension of people being taught that suffering means something about your humanity. And maybe in some cases, but if this issue is bringing you that much turmoil inside and it's disrupting your relationships or it's disrupting your ability to think through something without being stuck in the passion of it, then to me that's more harmful than anything else, because you can't do a lot when you're in a place of being fearful or indignant, but you can do a lot when you're convicted about a belief, in which you can also hear other people's perspectives and try to empathize with why someone else may think differently from you.
Hmm.
I think it brings people closer together when you can do that.
Oh, absolutely. But for whatever reason, we're as a whole, we're failing at that. Like, and it's
Yeah.
probably only going to get worse as we get into, the election cycle and everything. And so I'm dreading it. But I think that's a really good point, is maybe it is a little bit about that feeling of alive and passion. Whereas I
Mhm.
think a lot of people are living lives where they're lacking something they're truly passionate about. And it doesn't necessarily need to be their work. I recognize that
Mhm.
not everybody works in something that they consider to be their passion or their purpose or whatnot, but a hobby, of a relationship, several relationships, something that really makes them feel alive. And I think a lot of people are living void of that in general. So then they feel maybe a spark of it in these kind of more anger or more negative reactions to these controversial issues that we've got going on, and then they latch on to that because they like
Mhm.
that feeling.
Yeah, and it's a feeling of power, and we lack a lot
Mm,
of powerlessness. We lack a lot of power, and we feel sense of powerlessness in our world right now. So I can understand why people would attach to a concept or a feeling and believe that it matters that much that that feeling is true 100% of the time.
Yes. And so, okay, that's a great segue into, all right, so you are in the professional world of helping all of us. So both from therapist, life coach, writer, and I would imagine things are, all of our anxieties and stressors and issues are getting stirred up maybe even more frequently given everything that's going on. So the stress of your job might have increased, but you're also a human. So it's like, how do you balance that, spending so much of your time helping others, but then still staying in a good place yourself and like not taking all of that on?
Mm. Yeah, that's a really powerful question. And I've had my struggles with it. I like for people to actually see me as more human than as some superhero that they want me to be, because I don't know why this is, but I do think that it has something to do with my spirituality, which is I believe I was given a life that certain things, not all good things, happened to me so that I could be used in a way to help other people work through their pain. Because on the
Mm-hmm.
outside, people make a lot of assumptions about me before I open my mouth. And when I do speak or when I do listen attentively to people, the minute that I do, the amazing thing is how quickly they attach to me.
Mm,
And so I've had that experience my entire life. And that actually sometimes is very draining for me, how people easily attach to me. So I've had to learn how to work on healthy boundaries, because I'll meet someone and the same day I meet them, sometimes they want to be friends or they want to hang out. And honestly speaking, over the years that I've really worked more on myself, I've learned how to protect that energy that I was speaking of earlier. And I've learned like what kind of energy I need to be around in order not to feel succumb to the pressure of trying to heal or diagnose people. So I do several different things, but what I often go back to is I spend time in quiet spaces.
mm,
So my home isn't noisy. I can't actually be in other people's homes where there's a lot of action. Like if you have the TV on and it is groups of people talking at the same time, and then other people come into the room and start a conversation. Like that's what goes on in my family. Like there'll
mm-hmm.
be a group of people in the kitchen talking and someone else will walk in and start talking, and that person who you were talking to will start another conversation with someone who just walked into the room. I'm
It's
like,
100% my family also.
and I'm like, oh my God, this like makes me dizzy. And I can't deal with all of that stimuli. And so I've noticed that about myself. So I don't spend too much time at anyone's house for extended periods of time, because I really value my quiet. Like I have a lot of sunlight in my house that brings me a lot of joy. So I make time for that. I make sure that I open my windows every day, even in the winter, so that I can get natural sunlight and bring warmth into my home. I spend a lot of time with things turned off, gadgets. I don't watch much television. I don't keep the radio on during the day. And doing that, Casey, really gives me a lot of feedback. So when I'm walking through my house, something that is totally off my mind will come into my thoughts. And I'm like, oh, that's the answer for such and such. Or,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I need to do this thing. Or, oh, that's the revelation that I was, looking for when I was frustrated about a conversation. And so that is super helpful to me, so that I'm literally meditating all day long.
Mm-hmm.
That has been tremendously helpful to me. The other thing that I do is when I started this work as a private practitioner, I wasn't doing it full time. I was working for someone else, and then I started working part time for myself, and then I increased more time for my business and less for other people. And then eventually, 3.5 years ago, I went into full entrepreneurship. So doing that, I made my schedule to include time with my family and my loved ones, so that I wasn't working 5 days a week. And then as that time changed and progressed and people transitioned, I started to get that time back and use it just for things that I love to do. So I intentionally spend time with a select number of people who give me joy, who laugh with me, who talk about all kinds of things, who are open minded, who challenge me to think different ways. And then I also make sure that I don't tune in to what everyone else is doing. So if
Mm.
someone says, I really need to talk about this, I have to check in with myself first. If I'm drained and exhausted from my week, I'm helping my family do something, and I just came off of a really challenging work week, I'll be honest with them and just say, like, can we put this off till next week? Where in the past, I would have just said, okay, call me right now. Let's talk about it. And I would have been exhausted just like that as I spoke it to say, reach out whenever you're ready. And I would have extended myself. And then I would have probably felt more exhausted, or I would have even been a little bit annoyed later. I don't
Mm-hmm.
do that to myself anymore. I make sure that I treat myself very lovingly. And so I check in with me first to see where I'm at. And I don't let people just come in and just start talking to me or just bombard me with things. I pace myself, I see where I'm at, and then I usually get back to them.
Okay, how did you learn to do that? Like, is it a matter
Mhm.
of kind of paying attention to your own energy and feelings and recognizing, okay, this is what is good for me and this is what is not, and what is not? Then you went down the process of setting those boundaries. But like, how did you first
Mhm.
know, okay, I can't deal with all of this hecticness,
Hecticness.
yeah,
Yeah.
whatever, chaos, all these noises, like that's not good
Mhm.
for me. How'd you figure that out?
Uh, I was in a lot of pain. I was in a
Mm.
lot of emotional pain, and I was starting to really notice who was showing up and who wasn't. And again, this goes back to the thing we talked about earlier. I started to see the connections between how many people in my life would show up when they needed advice, but didn't show up for other things. Like I
Mm.
would have birthday parties, or that's like really the only thing I celebrate during the year is my birthday. And that wasn't the litmus test for my friendship, but I would notice that even if I had that and let's say other things that I was working on that I was really creative about and excited to launch, and I would ask for support, the same people who would want me to do a show or write an article for their blog, if I in turn said, hey, I'm having this event, would love for you to attend, they wouldn't even respond, let alone
Hmm.
say, no,
Yeah.
thank you. They would just avoid me. And that would happen repeatedly. And I started to feel really annoyed about that. And so I got in touch with my anger. And I think this is the thing that I find very common when people see helpers and healers is they don't expect you to be angry at all
Hmm.
about anything. They expect you to just have this like very carefree, ethereal attitude, like you're floating on a cloud. And I'm not that person. I'm very peaceful, but inside I am raging about things that you can't tell. And when I talk about it to people, only a very, very few people, like maybe one close girlfriend, understands that because we're both in this field. We both do a lot of work on ourselves. But I had to, I just started to, I guess, spend more time in my mind and in my body, which is tremendous work, to notice
Hmm.
how I would feel after repeated assaults from people of this like showing up and dumping on me, not showing up for other things, taking a long time to get back in touch when I reached out to them. Um, just that was happening so frequently, and I was seeing it more often. And again, in my spaces of being alone and in quiet, it would come back to me so that when I wasn't busy, I would flash back to, oh, I haven't heard from this person in a long time. Or I remember the last couple of times I heard from them, they only called me when they wanted advice about something or they wanted money. Um, or they wanted to borrow something. And so when I started to see that repeatedly and was in touch with my anger through just the quiet time that I spent, those two things together touched each other. And so I said, oh, okay, this does not feel good. And then I would go out to public places and people would do the same kind of thing. Just come up to me and start talking and dumping and, or, uh, making comments about how I appeared or judging something that I was wearing. And I was like, this is really bizarre. And so I would notice it and then I would start either saying something about it a little bit more often, and then I would start doing things such as distancing myself from people. And should they ask if they wanted to, most times they did not, I would be very expressive about how I felt. So just pacing myself and being in a lot of pain really transformed me.
Okay. Okay. I have a lot of follow-up questions, but first, because I'm just curious, because you've mentioned this a couple times, what are the assumptions that people make when they just see you?
I think based on, let's say, men that are attracted to me, I think they think I'm confident, but what in turn I believe it is that they think I am gregarious. I
Oh,
think I have this beautiful woman that was my advisor in undergraduate, Dr. Werner. I had lunch one time with she and her husband, and she said something that struck me, and so did he. And I had never met him before, but I knew of her for years because of school. And I was in my early 20s when she said to me, "You're going to have some challenges in your life because you have an air of confidence, your posture, it's very strong, and people are turned off by that." And she said, "I know because I lived with that my entire life." And her
mm,
husband seconded it. He said, "Yeah, you have a power about you that people will be very intimidated by, and it's not you, it's them." And I thought, oh God, these people are cursing me. 'Cause I was like, what are you talking about? But they were right. And it's just, I mean, I trained as a dancer as a young kid, and so I sit a certain kind of way. I'm very attentive to people, so maybe that has something to do with it. So when I walk into rooms alone, a lot of times minding my own business, the strangest people will come up to me, mostly narcissistic people, and they'll start talking about themselves, and they'll make assumptions about what kind of things I'm interested in or what kind of people I would want to be around, and they know nothing about me. And so I've just found those things have, and I think also because I'm very expressive and I'm very creative. So I express myself through how I wear my hair or colors that I wear or adornments I wear on my arms. People take a lot of notice to what I'm wearing and what my hair looks like. And I also think it's because I have, in some people's eyes, sort of a ambiguous ethnic look. So they're
hmm
also trying to figure out what's my ethnic background and what kind of interests do I have in certain things. And I grew up in a place where a lot of people, I guess, just didn't see people like me for a long time. And so then as I grew older, I would just have all of these very strange reactions to people on the street saying things to me, from compliments to derogatory things. And
hmm
I think it was just, again, like maybe an air of that extension of my trauma, where on the outside, just by my height, I'm like 5'9".
hmm
I guess I walk with a certain kind of confidence. I try to walk with my head up because I spent a lot of time with my head down growing up. That people just assume that I am, I guess, full of myself. And so when they start talking to me, they don't ask me a thing about me. they don't they
hmm
don't listen to what I'm interested in. They don't know when they walk away from conversations who I am. And so for those reasons, it's been hard sometimes to make friends, like real
Yeah.
genuine friendships with people, because folks think they know one thing about me, and I'm totally different than any of that stuff that they think. I'm the kind of person that I like to walk barefoot outside or inside.
Yes.
Um, I like to put my hands in messy things and play, and I like to be around the people who folks would think are outcasts. I like to listen to interesting stories of other people's lives. I like to go to countries where people would never think that you should travel. And that's not what people think when they look at me.
hmm That's interesting. All right. I have a question about kind of going back to what you were saying about getting in touch with your anger or your
Mhm.
rage and paying attention to what that means for you so that you can set boundaries. How do you or do you find that people struggle with kind of figuring out the difference between, like, okay, yes, this is an issue of this person like encroaching on my boundaries maybe that I have or haven't set, or I'm making assumptions. And so I'll give you an example. I find this happening, like with my mother. It'll be interesting to see if she listens to this episode. So she'll, or really, I guess several people, because, I left my corporate job. And so I'm in this freelance world where I think that people then assume, oh, I kind of just do what I want all day and I'm not that busy, when really I have to actively try to take one day a week off just for my own kind of energy. But I think people think because I'm not showing up at, a 9 to 5, that I live this great, easy life. And there are perks, but that I'm kind of stress-free. So I'll find that, people will text me throughout the day certain things, and then I get annoyed or angry, and I can admit I'm not good about dealing with or even addressing my own anger. I think that's just work I have to do. But that I don't know if that is a boundary setting exercise, because like I think, oh, they think I'm just doing nothing and they expect me to respond right now and be able to do this or go to this thing or whatever. And I can't have this conversation right now because I'm go, go, go all day. And so I don't know, is that a situation where I should set boundaries, or a situation where I'm projecting I'm making assumptions of what they think and projecting like my own internal issues onto them. So it's like, how do we tell the difference between like, there is something that needs to be addressed here, whether it's internal or setting boundaries with somebody else?
Yeah, I think we're sisters. I feel like you know me so well. I think that is everything, and you can do both. You can look at why this is upsetting you and then decide whether or not there's something for you to do. And that's a different way that I've come to analyzing what to do or say about any numbers of things that I'm thinking, because life has been great in terms of how I come to evolve, because I used to think, even up to very recently, that I had to say something all the time. And I was having this conversation with my sister recently, where she's very much like us in describing ourselves this way too, where she gets frustrated over people encroaching on her time. And I, feel the same way. But I said to her, sis, I realize that sometimes my cell phone is a holding space for people to just do and say whatever they feel, and I don't have to respond. The cell phone will just hold it, and that might be enough for those folks, and that's okay, because that gives me one less thing to address. And sometimes those folks don't even notice, right? They go in, they dump, they say something. I don't give it that much attention. I used to get very aggravated like you when people would at 11 o'clock on a Monday morning say, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
What am I doing?
I'm brunching.
Right. I'm doing my nails. What are you talking about? It's 11 o'clock on Monday. What would I be doing? And I would find myself, Casey, repeatedly telling people the same thing. And then I just started to say, that is too much. I am tired. People do not understand what I do, and that's okay. Like, I had to tell myself that out loud, that people really don't know what a therapist does. They don't know exactly what a coach does, no matter if they're on social media or I've explained it to them or they've been to school themselves. And because of that, I just have stopped going into dialogues with people about why you cannot call me at 11 o'clock on a Monday morning to ask me a personal question, or why, I don't have time to like jump on a midday phone call about what's happening at your house during quarantine. It's just, they don't really understand. And I've decided that it's no longer my job to make people understand my life. My job is in turn to protect my life. And so I just sometimes literally take a deep breath and I exhale that shit. And I'm like, you know what? And I walk away from my phone, because that internal work is where it all begins. I have to look inward and think to myself, not, is this upsetting me? It's obvious that it is if I feel that strongly about it, but it's more of, why is this upsetting me? And second to that, what is there to do about it, if at all anything? And when I think of those 2 or 3 questions in that kind of way, in that sequence, then most times I bring down that flooding of my blood pressure going up, my mind racing, that rage, like literally making my skin hot. I just say, you know what? I've said this 1,000 times to this person when I'm doing at 11 o'clock on Monday morning. They have obviously not held on to it. That is not my problem. That is theirs. And
Mm-hmm.
so if it's not urgent, I'll get back to them when I'm free. And that's what I've been doing. I've just showed up. I've showed up every time that I needed to just check in with myself and then go back into I'll check in when I'm ready. And most times, because people are so self absorbed, they don't even notice.
Or they do because they take it very personally, which then again,
Yeah,
that's their issue. And
that's
then
their issue.
it's back on us to be like, okay, well, if they're all upset, like
Mm,
that's their issue, and not let it then get to you again. It's like there's these constant tests of like, are
yeah.
you going to let this person
Are
get
you?
to you?
Yeah. But you know what I've done with that is this is the boundary part that you asked about. It's when I notice what it's doing to me, that's the work that I do. It may take the rest of the day to do that work on myself, to just turn away from my phone, put it on silent, flip my phone over, take a deep breath and sigh. Sometimes I may text, my friend about it, but I'll just walk away. And then if they do take it personally, which I still have a few people left in my life that do, but most don't because they've excluded themselves or I've excluded them, um, I'll ask them, why is this making you so upset? And most
Yeah.
times they have to pause and think about that because if they go back to that question, they've probably heard me tell them many times before. And it then sometimes makes them feel ashamed. But my goal is never to make people feel ashamed. It's to help people to think about what they're doing that's impacting them and affecting me. And so,
Mm-hmm.
my role is to make sure I take care of myself. Now you have to figure out how to take care of yours. So if you're upset that I continue to ignore your text messages or your phone calls or your questions or your barrage of like problems, you need to stop and think about who you think I am.
Mm.
Because that has nothing to do with who I actually am. It's everything with your perception of who you think I am to you. And I'm not that person. And so I challenge people to think that. And when they do, they decide for themselves, do they want to continue to be in a space to reach out to me after I've told them a number of times, don't do that? A lot of times it helps them to reevaluate and back down off of this ledge of they need something from me when they need it and I'm supposed to respond to them. So the boundary is to get clear with people 1, maybe 2 times, but I often tell my clients this, that the boundary isn't the saying what you will do if someone should, infringe upon your time. It's the action of what you'll do should they do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's not, I'm not going to answer your phone call if you call me every day at the same time because I'm working. I'm not going to just say that. It is, should you call me every day at the same time, I'm not actually going to answer the phone.
Mm-hmm.
That's the boundary. It's the action of doing what I said for myself matters because that's disturbing. And to some people, I may have to just stop engaging if they don't respect that boundary.
Yes. Oh, I love that because it's bringing it back to us. We can't control other people,
That's right.
but it's like paying attention to what's bothering you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the boundary setting is where I probably have to do some work, but it reminds me of, have you read any of Michael Singer's books? He wrote,
No,
The Untethered Soul
I want
and
to.
yeah, and Surrender Experiment. I can't remember in which of these books he gives this great analogy, but it's like we walk around life with a thorn, a big thorn stuck in our arm. And whenever it hits certain things, it hurts, it moves, and it really hurts us. And what we tend to do is try and maneuver and navigate through life without anyone touching the thorn and like trying to say, stay away from this, blah, 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 instead of just removing the
Remove the
thorn.
thorn. Yeah.
And that I found that so helpful, but I think where it then gets tricky, going back to what we were talking about earlier of, needing to stand for things that you strongly believe in, or whether it be setting boundaries. It's like, if you remove every thorn and nothing bothers you, are you then letting everyone like walk all over you? And are you then not caring about things that matter? And so it's kind of that like higher spiritual level with also then just living life. I have a hard time marrying the two. The duality. There's the duality again.
Yeah. We're all on a journey of some sort to figure out, how do we want to live in this life? And for me, my answer comes back to, I want to live in this life fully, but I want to be peaceful doing it. So
Yes.
that also doesn't mean I'm going to sit with my, legs in lotus position for 24 hours, but I'm going to walk around. I'm going to be in this world, and I'm going to do whatever is necessary for me to stay alive in this world, feeling the things that I'm going to feel. And I feel very deeply about many things, but I'm not going to constantly be triggered by things that other people want me to feel, so that I can be in agreement with them, or I can be in friendship or relationship with them, because that's controlling and that's manipulating, and we have to determine the difference. And we need to understand that for some people, trauma is a lifestyle. They need to be triggered. They need to, in order to feel anything, they need to be enraged in order to feel alive. They need to be in conflict in order to feel alive. And that's no longer my life. So I don't live around people like that. I try to limit my engagement with people outside of my work who are like that, because there are people that I deeply care for, and they don't know how to live any other way besides being in conflict with other people and in conflict with themselves, betraying themselves. And I feel very deeply for those people. I feel often very sad, because I know that they feel powerless. They don't think that they can do anything about that. And I probably was one of those people. I would say I was one of those people, because that's where being triggered by other people so often reminds you that, oh, you are out of control of yourself, because everything
Yeah.
bothers you.
Yes.
So I read a lot of books from time to time, from different spiritual practitioners. I'm really into Sharon Salzberg and Bell Hooks right now. So I read a lot about love, because I do want to experience living life more loving and more peaceful. And I find that my life is more enjoyable that way. And I don't know if people enjoy their time with me being that way, but that's at the core who I am. And I still get pretty pissed off about things, but I let people know it.
Yes. Okay. Same. I need to do a better job of letting people know when I'm pissed off, but I feel the same way of like, I'm on this spiritual journey and I want to be calmer and more peaceful. And I struggle sometimes with I might not then be as much quote unquote fun to hang out with as I used to be when I was, all over the place and kind of party mode, but that's truer to who I actually am. And I think that's the journey I'm on here. But I love what you said about, if you're bothered by everything, then you're not in control of yourself. And I think there's a lack of a realization of that, but and that's what one of the next spiritual things I kind of want to dive into is stoicism, because I think that was a lot about controlling your emotions and being in control of yourself. And so that might be my next spiritual deep dive. I know we're coming up on time, but before we wrap things up, I do want you to talk a little bit about your book, because I love the title of it, and I'm kind of curious, why this book and why now?
So my book, Adulting as a Millennial, A Guide to Everything Your Parents Didn't Teach You, was a fun title that I wanted for this first book that I wrote, because I wanted it to be eye-catching and ear candy for people, so they would have that intrigue to read it. I wanted a book that I thought would be a small guide, a useful tool for adults navigating adulthood, that I just think has gone amiss. I think there's not a lot of mentorship now. And I had mentors all over the place when I was growing up. And I probably didn't call them that when I was younger, but they were. They mentored me either through my career, pre-college, during college, my first couple of jobs. It was really awesome to have different kinds of people show up for me. And I haven't seen that since probably my second or third job post college, post graduate school. I found a lot of people coming out of graduate school in social work like me who didn't have great clinical supervision, which is a requirement when we get out of school and actually when we're in our field placements. They were just kind of figuring things out. And I just thought, wow, how tragic, because there are a lot of people's lives you could injure by not having clear and good grounded supervision. So this book for me was a way for me to reach a lot more people that I can't humanly do in my work now, and to be able to have literally some anecdotes from my life that helped transform me, and some things that I think people just overlook about life's lessons, that everything's not going to come with like a cherry on top, which I think we're living in that atmosphere now where people think like everything should be great all the time and exciting and sparkle. And no, sometimes things are going to hurt. People will hurt your feelings unintentionally. Um, you're not going to get every, accolade that you thought or someone told you you're supposed to have. You're going to have to work at what matters. It's not only about knowing people, but it's also about knowing your craft and honing it. And that takes endurance and perseverance and patience. Tune into yourself because it's the greatest guide you'll ever have. And so this book shows people that. It teaches them how to be more mindful. I literally use some mindfulness work to ask certain invasive questions of the way people think about themselves and other people in the world. I try to get people to see how powerful committing to your commitments are, and also how to be action oriented in your life, like how to really develop mutually beneficial relationships instead of just going to people when you need something, using them, and then walking away. No one likes to feel used. And we have too many people out here that think, well, if I just go on social media and DM you and ask you, how did you become successful? It's going to change my life. No, my dear, it's going to change your life if you decide what you want and you work at it, you study, you pay for some classes, and you do your internal work. You can't just borrow from people's lives. So this book really shows like adults, young adults, like how to show up in your life and how to be courageous and how to be honest and how to build a life of integrity, but it could be exciting and fun too. And so I'm hoping that's what people walk away from this book getting.
I love that. I think that those are just life skills that everybody needs to know. And they're certainly not taught. Like they're not taught to us in school. And so I think you're right that maybe it's more of those mentoring type relationships where those lessons used to be passed on. But now I feel like those mentoring type relationships have just been replaced by social media and virtual and technologically connecting instead of sitting down and having real conversation with somebody who's older and wiser and really listening and like taking all of that in. That's like an ancient practice.
It is. It really is. And I think there's two things going on, because I really believe in millennials. I have a lot of clients who are millennials. That's who I tend to attract in my work online and my work in my office. And I really adore them, but they're brave people. They want to try new things, but they have some trouble. And I'm not a millennial. I'm on a cusp of a millennial and a Generation Xer, but
so am I. I don't know where I am.
But they have real difficulty with doing something and sticking with it. It's like, oh, this didn't work today. Even when I work with people to train them on how to calm their mind, they'll try it one time in session. They feel good. Then you get them to go outside of session and do it. And they're like, oh, I tried it. It didn't work. Okay, try it again. Like, do you know how many times I had to try something again? And I think that might have also come from the training I had as a dancer. Like, I used to dance on Saturdays at my school 6 hours every Saturday. Then I used to get up and go teach it to other kids. And then my last year of school, that was my first period course. So I danced 7 times a week in 6 days. But on Saturday, I used to literally dance for 6 hours. They would have us get up and do the same routine 150 times, it felt like. And just that like repetition of doing
Mm-hmm.
something over and over is missing in our society. And that's, again, the lack of critical skills thinking, the power of training your mind to do something repeatedly until it becomes a habit, a healthy habit, and also not having people in your life, because everyone's so self-absorbed these days, not having people in
Mm-hmm.
your life who are willing to confront you on that bull crap, saying to you like, no, you don't quit everything that you don't like, or you don't, give up on something because you didn't get the results or the response the first time. You have to stick with things. You have to learn how to build relationships by coming to the table with specific things that you need and being willing to be vulnerable, and then take the time to be patient to learn what you can learn from other people, and continue to follow up and do the work and be present mentally, not just like drop in and drop out. And so that's what the book is really for. It's those life skills that people are missing, and too many times that people who are more experienced are not willing to do, because folks just don't have the patience for it these days. But that's what we need more of. We need more patient people who are willing to like look back and see who needs help and say, I'm here. I'm willing to help. What do you need?
Oh gosh, I love that. I hope every millennial reads it. If they read, I think some of them do.
Yeah, or get
That's
it
one
on
of the
Audible. We're gonna
yes,
have it on
perfect.
Kindle as well, but we're gonna also be doing an audio book of it soon. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Are you going to read the Audible?
No, I actually haven't shared this with anyone yet, but I have someone that I adore that has a really beautiful, comforting voice, and they do voiceover work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with her to do the Audible book.
Okay, that's awesome. That's very exciting. I can't thank you enough for coming on. This was such an incredible conversation.
Oh, wow.
It's just one of those like energizes me and makes me feel good. So as I pay attention to my energy, I know that conversations like this are a good thing for me versus all of
Mm.
the, hecticness. Tell everybody where they can find you and your work and the book and follow you and all that good stuff.
Oh, Casey, thank you so much. So you can go to my website where everything is hosted. So www.lifecoachasha.com. I have a blog there, which I encourage people to sign up for, because I give a lot of coaching tips every week there. The book is there, so you can click to Amazon right from that and get the Kindle if you want, or the paperback. And where people want to book me for great shows like this or speaking engagements, they can do the same there. But I'm also on Instagram every day at Asha Tarry Mental, and I'm on Twitter at Asha Tarry, and I'm also on LinkedIn. But I chat with people mostly on Instagram and Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
I had such a good time. Thank you for this conversation.
All right, that'll do it for this week's episode. Thank you again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a rating or review on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. You can also follow us on the socials. We are on Instagram and Facebook at The Better You Podcast. If you're enjoying the show, feel free to share it up on your own socials and tag the podcast so that we see. I absolutely love it when people do that. It really does make my day. So go ahead, find your favorite episode, just post it to your story or whatever, and tag me so that I see it and can just thank you profusely. If you have feedback for me or guest or topic requests, you can always reach me at thebetteryouPodcast@gmail.com. I try to remain very accessible. And that is it. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Thank you again.